So we are continuing our sermon series called Revealing True Power. We are looking at the Gospel of Mark. And like I said earlier, we have chapter 14 today, 15 next week, and then Easter, we have chapter 16. And I hope that you've enjoyed Mark so far. And everything we've been talking about Mark has been building up to this point. I mean, it has been building up to get us into Jerusalem with the Passover lamb of Jesus, right? Like we've been getting up to that point as we've been talking about how Mark has been eroding all these senses of power that we derive and find salvation in. How we view salvation in things like political power. We say things like, if I can just elect the right person, then we'll be okay. Right? Or we believe in religious power, where it's like, if I can just believe the right things, practice the right things, then I will get into the mansions and pavement made with gold and all those things, right? I think it's funny that we believe all that stuff, and when we believe that, then there's no need for a savior, but that's beside the point. So then we believe in personal power. We believe that like, you need to listen to me and be like me. Then we will have good times, right? If you're all just like me. Can you imagine the anarchy that would be if everyone was like me? Nothing would get done. Everyone would be trying to say subpar jokes all the time and all that stuff. But it's, it would be a complete mess. Because what you need to understand about me, about 20 years ago, I was in high school and kind of early college, and I was super cool back then. You guys can imagine how cool I was, right? Like I was like, why are you guys laughing? I'm telling you real stories. Like all these things. Like I was like, just to add my cool cred onto it, I was homeschooled, so that adds, right? And I was over there, and I did all the cool things. Back then I was really into like kind of more of a hard rock kind of scene, and you would never hear me like listening to pop music, especially the band that's on there. Now, first service failed. Who is this? Good job, Piper. You could have held up the first service, right? Like all that stuff, In Sync. Some of you heard Piper say In Sync. You're like, I've never heard of this band before. That says more about you guys than anything else, all right? But that's you would never catch me, because this in the late 90s, early 2000s, like the big like conglomerate music companies like decided that the way that we needed to do things was do casting calls and create these artificial bands, call them boy bands, and we got a bunch of them. You have In Sync. Does anyone know what this picture is of? That's the Backstreet Boys. Yeah. All right, you get the Backstreet Boys. 98 Degrees was part of this whole thing. Just corporate bands. And I was like, I'm no corporate sellout right over there. Hand me that Coca-Cola, by the way. And I'm not a corporate sellout. I listen to hard rock. I'm better than any of all this other stuff, right? I would never I'd be listening to the top 40 station. And they'd come on and turn it off out of principle, right? You got to have your principles. You can't be listening to In Sync and the Backstreet Boys. Never mind that they may have like a good beat or anything. That's beside the point. But I was going to all these hard rock shows, and what's funny, I'm going to skip a little bit of time. Here's what you got to understand about me too. During that moment in my life, I was probably going to 2 or 3 concerts a week. Now, I grew up in the Atlanta area, very music-forward community there, and going to a lot of different things. It was the late 90s, early 2000s. I was into ska. Do you guys even know what ska is? Yes. See Piper? Piper's answering all the questions. Ska? Like that's, and then also I was into like screamo music. Do you guys know what that's like? Emo music, and then add some screaming into it. You guys would love it. And all that stuff. For a while, I had some blue hair things going on and all that stuff. So you guys are like, what? I didn't know this. I thought you had the gospel living in you. So I've been telling you, I don't. Like, it's like, that's the way it goes. And so I listen to all this stuff, and I was too good for all this. But then all of these hard rock bands, and you can picture it, like piercings everywhere, like wide Jinko jeans. I don't know if you guys remember those, or some of you of a certain age know about them. That's they're coming back, by the way. I don't know if you've seen that, but they're like just over there. You just got this picture of it. We go there, and they would have these hard rock shows, and they would, to get the crowd kind of all together and kind of in sync, and like they would begin to sing one of these boy band songs. And here's what's funny. I know a lot of the lyrics, and if I wanted to punish you further, I could sing them right now of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, because these rock bands would play these songs, and everybody in these huge concert things would be belting out these songs at the top of their lungs. And at that point, I learned a valuable lesson. Like, I learned as I watched these guys that I kind of idolize, these hard rock guys and all that, enjoying these songs and playing them kind of in a different context. I was like, oh, like, music isn't something to be prideful about. Like, it's something that kind of bring us together and things like that. And so, but it was funny that I felt that I was too good. I had too much pride in what my group was, that I was like, they can just go away, right? They could just go away. And that's what chapter 14, that's what's going on. Because we see that all of this misplaced power and the search for more and greatness and all these things is all coming, and it's collapsing onto Jesus, and it's going to crush him. It's going to kill him. And that's why we wanted to call this sermon Pride Kills, but alas, I just couldn't do it. It looked too rough there, especially with NSYNC. And I was like, But we couldn't just do that. But everything has been working to this moment. So the way this sermon's going to work today is we are going to start at the bottom of chapter 14, at the very end of it, and we're going to rewind through it. And there's something near the beginning of 14 that I want you to see. And even Mark wants you to see it, because right before 14, the last statement, in the midst of all that apocalyptic stuff that Jesus is talking about, he ends with this one phrase, and it's to watch. To watch all of what is going on, so that we can put our watching hats on, put on our binoculars and watch. And I think he says that right as we go into chapter 14, into the arrest of Jesus, the denial of Peter, and all these things. He's inviting us to watch. And that's what I want us to do today, is watch. Because our pride often gets in the way. We see Peter. We know Peter, right? Here's a photograph of Peter doing things, right? Peter, we know him. He knows that Jesus is the Christ. He knows Jesus is the one. After all, Jesus came and said, hey, Peter, follow me. And he's like, well, that seems like a good idea on a Thursday. And he follows after him, right? He goes. And Jesus even asked Peter at one point, who do people say that I am? And Peter puffs out his chest, and he's like, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are the one that's going to save us. This is who you are. But we know what Peter was actually thinking. Jesus was the Messiah, but he was Peter's vision of the Messiah. He knew that Jesus was going to take political power, kick all the baddies out. He's going to get the Rome out, all the people who aren't righteous. He's going to kick them all out, kick them all to the curb. And Peter saw Jesus become all bright and shiny, and God from the midst of the clouds say, this is my son, listen to him. Peter knows who Jesus is. But what he knows isn't exactly correct. And he takes pride in what he knows. But the thing is Peter's pride is preventing him as seeing the Messiah as the suffering servant, from what Coley read in Isaiah. His pride can't see the Messiah suffering and rising again 3 days. Peter has no vision of how salvation could ever come when it's being planted in the earth like a seed, only to rise again. Yet with Peter, and Jesus isn't living up to these expectations that he has. He's promised that he will never deny Jesus. He looks at everyone else. Peter would stand on the stage and look down at you guys and go, you guys will all let this guy down. Not me. I will never let him down. I have his side no matter what. All these people will deny you, Jesus, but I never will. However, when Jesus' salvation promises aren't aligning with Peter's, the power to stand up upon his own pride begins to crumble, and that prideful picture of the Messiah begins to fall down. And suddenly a voice of the servant of the high priest goes, yeah, you were with Jesus, weren't you? And Peter's like, no. 3 times. He said, no, it's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. Not once, not twice. And it ends all in tears of pride and power and the rock of what Jesus called Peter. And the rock, like a stone, cast down onto the ground. And as you look up from there, so we scroll up to the next story right above it. You have the Sanhedrin, all these political and religious leaders, all seeking after political power, wanting to erode Jesus. Since the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, they have had it in for him. They can't stand him because he is providing freedom to people. He has been providing people a way out of all the bondage that they have been in putting them under. They have been these political leaders. They have been in charge the whole time. They've been able to kill anyone that would get in their way. After all, that's what they did with John the Baptist. And they did it off of a whim, off of a drunk, sexualized whim. They killed John the Baptist. But lately, Jesus has been getting a little too close to their stuff. He's in the temple giving freedom to the people from those religious leaders, and they can't handle it anymore. So they, most likely in an illegal trial, they arrest Jesus in the midst of the night and clothed in darkness. They lead him before a tribunal. And all of these witnesses all together creating these stories, one by one, they tell about Jesus as saying that he is God and he's going to destroy the temple. But none of them line up. You see, Rome in all of its power, they don't really care about some small-time prophet. They don't care. But when someone begins to threaten Roman property, like the temple, when someone threatens to upset the peace, Pax Romana, any of you history buffs in the room, you know what that is. The peace that Rome has set up, they then get upset and they make you pay. But this cloaked in dark trial could not keep their story straight. This ramshackle trial was done so poorly that it was going to look like it was going to fall apart. And they finally, the high priest asked Jesus in a last-ditch effort, they say, "Are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah, Son of the most blessed high?" And Jesus, who has been remaining silent this whole time, says, "I am." Which is Exodus overtones, which is overtones of the burning bush, and God saying, "I am." And he says, "And I will be on the right hand of the side of God." And they're like, "Yeah, we finally got him. He admitted it." They're over there, and their pride sends him to the cross. And you scroll up from there, and you see Judas, filled with personal pride and ambition, You have Judas walking down a dimly lit path with a newly heavy money bag banging against his thigh as he walks, leading a small ragtag group of small-time mercenaries and guards to arrest Jesus. And he walks right up to him and kisses Jesus right on the cheek. An expensive, deceptive kiss that would buy so many homes and luxuries for Judas. Judas' pride is going to forget all this trouble, all of this struggle the Messiah has brought. He can retire in a wealthy man. And this all culminates where they are. This all culminates. The story of Peter, Judas, the religious leaders, the governing officials, they're all jockeying for power and pride, and it all centers on Jesus. It all centers around him. And the story is pivoting around this moment. And this, as it sits all here, where we're talking about all this power and pride, it reminds me of me and how I often look like Peter. That in my pride, I put so much faith in what I want Jesus to do for me that I miss what Jesus is actually doing. It reminds me of the religious leaders and those political leaders that are so prideful in doing what they view as right. We got to do just the right thing and get you to do just the right thing. That they end up missing out on the grace that Jesus is getting. And it reminds me of Judas. Judas, who has his own personal pride and his selfish gain. He's willing to destroy relationships in people's lives over it. I jokingly mentioned that my pride is, talking about looking down at groups like NSYNC, which is hilarious because they're making more money than I ever will, right? I'm like, I'm better than you. And yet that means nothing. It's easy to point out those. It's harder to stand up and talk about the times that my pride has gotten in the way of me being a servant of Christ, of me being a pastor. The times that my own pride may have affected the faith or the faith of someone that we know or someone maybe in this room or maybe someone that isn't in this room anymore, right? That I have to sit with that. And I think we don't have to think too hard about the times that our pride has ended up killing a relationship in our own lives. I don't think we have to look too hard to see it happen over the last 2 years, as we've had pride of belief and pride of what we do, right? So what our pride does is it pushes us away from the table of Jesus. And I want you to remember what it says right before chapter 14. Watch. Watch. Because I think there's something very specific going on. Watch. Because right above where Judas betrays him and the disciples can't stay awake in the garden, you have Jesus standing up in his last meal. And he takes up and lifts up a piece of bread and he says, "Take, this is my body." And he took the cup, and when he given thanks, he gave it to them, and they drank it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." It's poured out for you. Watch. Who was at that dinner? Who was at that dinner that Jesus is saying, "This is my body, this is my blood, the blood that is shed for you, and there's a covenant and all of that"? Who is at that dinner? It's Judas is at that dinner. Peter is at that dinner. the ones that would betray him, right? As he institutes that supper, all the disciples that would run away in fear are there. And Jesus knows full well what's going to happen. As he tells Peter at one point, you're going to betray me. And Peter's like, oh. And then also, and he says about this, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, the one who is eating with me. It is the one of the 12, the one who is dipping his bread into the dish with me. Jesus says even, woe to him. He probably wouldn't even wish that he's born. But watch. The traitor who is acting in power and pride, that prideful one is there at the table. The denier, Peter, who's had this prideful and powerful vision of who the Messiah should be, who ends up denying and kind of destroying Jesus in the process, he's there. Even though Jesus knows that he's going to deny him 3 times, he's at the table. Watch. Watch. Christian, we have often acted in pride and power. We have done what is right in our own eyes to serve ourselves. And we have even said that those things that we are doing in our own eyes and what we want, we've even had the audacity to say, this is what Jesus says for me to do. Hear me and watch. If Judas and Peter were there, you and me can be there too. You are still invited to the table of the Lord with Jesus. So take and eat and drink. This is his true body, broken and shed for you. And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there.